This is a true story from my life, something I never thought I'd tell anyone. But some truths are too heavy to carry alone, and some victories too hard-won to keep silent. The smell of gasoline, old leather, and Bondo hung in the air of my workshop, the same air I'd breathed for 40 years. But that day, it was tainted by the scent of cheap cologne and betrayal. My daughter, Chloe, stood beside her husband, Marcus, her eyes fixed on the half-restored 1967 Shelby GT 500 in the center of the room, the very car I was lovingly bringing back to life for her. It was Marcus who spoke, his voice slick as fresh oil, as he handed me the sheaf of legal documents. "We've sold the property, Arthur," he said, not even a flicker of remorse in his eyes. "The developers are giving us 8 figures for it. It's just a business decision. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, sharp and alien in the sanctuary I had built with my own 2 hands. My workshop, Hayes Heritage Restorations, wasn't just a business. It was a museum of memories, a cathedral of steel and chrome rising from a modest plot of land in Pasadena, California, that my father had bought when the orange grove still outnumbered the houses. Every tool hanging on the pegboard walls had a story. The heavy English wheel in the corner was a gift from my late wife, Eleanor, for our 10th anniversary. The German-made lathe was my father's before me. This place was my soul made tangible. And they had sold it. They. My only child and the man she married. I looked at Chloe, searching for the little girl who used to hand me wrenches and ask a million questions about carburetors. She wasn't there. In her place was a stranger with a tight, nervous smile, a woman who couldn't meet her own father's gaze. "Chloe?" I whispered, my voice cracking. She finally looked at me, a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, before Marcus put a proprietary hand on her shoulder. "Dad, it's for the best," she said, parroting a line I was sure he had coached her on. "The money will set us up for life. It'll set you up, too. You can finally retire. Play golf. Do old people things." The condescension was a physical blow. I was 64, not 104. My hands, though stained with the permanent grime of engine grease, were as steady as they'd been at 30. My mind was sharp. Retiring from this place would be like retiring from breathing. The lawyer they'd brought along, a man who looked like he'd been assembled from a kit of spare parts for a predator, cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, the documents are all in order. Your daughter, as your designated power of attorney, has authorized the sale. The new owners take possession in 30 days. Power of attorney." My mind flashed back 6 months. I'd been down with a nasty bout of pneumonia, the kind that rattles your bones and makes you think about mortality. Marcus had come to the hospital, his face a mask of concern, with a stack of papers. "Just some estate planning, Arthur," he'd said gently. "To make sure Chloe can handle things if you ever get really sick. Just a precaution." I was weak, hooked up to N4, and I trusted him. I trusted my daughter's husband. I signed where he pointed, my signature a feeble scrawl. I had signed away my life's work. My legacy. I felt the concrete floor sway beneath my feet. "Get out," I said, the words low and dangerous. Marcus actually smirked. That smug, punchable expression he always wore when he thought he'd won. "Look, Arthur, don't be dramatic. We're doing you a favor. This place is a relic. It's bleeding money. I ran the numbers. You're barely breaking even." He didn't understand. He saw everything as numbers on a spreadsheet. He couldn't see the soul in the curve of a fender, the history in the patina of worn leather. He couldn't comprehend that profit wasn't the point. Passion was. I said, "Get out." I took a step forward, and for the first time, Marcus's confidence wavered. He was a creature of boardrooms and sterile offices. Here, in my world of metal and fire, I was the one with power. He took a half step back, pulling Chloe with him. They left without another word, the lawyer scuttling after them. The heavy bay door rolled shut, plunging the workshop into a dim, dusty silence, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. I was alone, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 projects, the echoes of laughter and hard work. I walked over to the Shelby, its primer gray body a canvas of future promises, now a monument to my own stupidity. I laid a hand on the cool metal of the roof. It was for her. All of it was for her. And she had taken it, gutted it, and sold it for scrap. The first few days were a blur of numb disbelief. I packed 40 years of my life into cardboard boxes. Each tool felt impossibly heavy, weighted down with memories. The sale closed with brutal efficiency. I was handed a cashier's check for a sum that felt like an insult, a fraction of what the land was worth, and an even smaller fraction of what the place meant to me. Marcus, ever the magnanimous victor, had arranged for me to move into a sterile one-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex in Arcadia. The place smelled of disinfectant and despair. My new neighbors were ghosts waiting for the end, shuffling to bingo games and early bird dinners. I was a prisoner in a beige box. My world shrunk from a sprawling workshop of infinite possibility to 4 walls and a window overlooking a manicured lawn I was forbidden to walk on after 9 p.m. Chloe called once. Her voice was strained, full of a false brightness that grated on my raw nerves. "Dad? Are you settled in? Marcus found a great place, didn't he? It's got a pool." I didn't say anything. "We're closing on our new house in Beverly Hills next week," she prattled on. "It's incredible. You'll have to come see it once we're moved in." The silence stretched. I could hear Marcus whispering in the background. "Just hang up, he's being difficult." Chloe's voice hardened slightly. "Dad, are you even listening? We did this for us. For our family." "You destroyed our family, Chloe," I said, the words tasting like ash. I hung up the phone and didn't hear from her again. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The rage cooled into a hard, dense stone of grief in my chest. I watched the world through my window, a spectator to my own life. I saw online articles about Marcus Thorne, the brilliant young financier who had engineered a massive real estate deal in Pasadena, lauded as a visionary. They ran a picture of him and Chloe, smiling, standing on the barren dirt lot where my workshop once stood. A large sign behind them read, "Future home of the Thorne residences, luxury living redefined." They hadn't just sold my legacy, they'd slapped their name on its grave. That was when the first crack appeared in my apathy. It was a small thing. An article in a local business journal mentioned the developer, Ethelred Development LLC. The name seemed odd. Pretentious. Out of place for a California developer. I spent my days at the Arcadia Public Library, the quiet hum of the computers a welcome change from the silence of my apartment. I started digging. It was slow work for a man more comfortable with a wrench than a mouse, but I was methodical. Patient. I'd spent years painstakingly reassembling complex machines, bolt by bolt. This was no different. Just a different kind of engine to take apart. Ethelred Development was a ghost. It had been formed only 2 months before the sale of my property. It had no other projects, no history, no digital footprint beyond a bare-bones website. Its registered agent was a firm in Delaware that specialized in creating anonymous shell corporations. The pieces didn't fit. A major developer paying 8 figures for a prime piece of Pasadena real estate should have a history. They should be proud, shouting their name from the rooftops. This felt hidden. It felt like a lie. The grief in my chest began to smolder. The stone was heating up, turning from a dead weight into a glowing coal. I needed help. I knew a guy, a friend from the old days, a former LAPD detective named Sal Rizzo who'd retired and now did freelance private investigation work, mostly for insurance companies. We used to drink beer and talk about cars. I hadn't seen him in years, but I still had his number. I called him from a payphone outside a 7-Eleven, feeling like a character in a spy movie. "Sal? It's Arthur Hayes." There was a pause. "Artie? Holy smokes, man. I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth." How you been? Not good, Sal. Not good at all. I told him everything. The workshop, the power of attorney, Chloe, and Marcus, the phantom developer. He listened without interrupting, the way a good cop does. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. The kid's a snake, Artie, Sal said finally, his voice a low growl. A power of attorney signed under those conditions? It stinks to high heaven. But it'll be your word against his, and he's got the fancy lawyers. I know, I said. That's not what I'm after. I want to know about Ethelred development. I want to know where the money came from. And where it went. Sal grunted. You got a feeling, don't you? The kind that gets under your skin. It's like finding a hairline crack in an engine block, Sal, I said. You can't see it right away, but you know if you put any pressure on it, the whole thing's gonna blow. Sal chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. All right, Artie. I'll do some digging. For old time's sake. Let's see what this snake has been shedding. I met Sal a week later at a Greasy Spoon diner in Eagle Rock, the kind of place that still had vinyl booths and jukeboxes that didn't work. He slid a manila folder across the sticky table as the waitress poured us coffee. He looked older, his face a roadmap of long nights and too many cigarettes, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Your son-in-law is a piece of work, Sal began, tapping a finger on the folder. Ethelred Development is a shell, just like you thought. It's owned by another shell, which is owned by a trust registered in the Cayman Islands. It's a classic Russian doll setup, designed to hide the real owner. Marcus, I said. It wasn't a question. Bingo, Sal confirmed. He didn't sell your property to a developer, Artie. He sold it to himself. He used your property as collateral to get a massive construction loan from a private equity firm in New York, a firm he has, let's call them close ties with. He paid you a fraction of what the loan was worth, pocketed the difference, and now he's the developer. He's building his condo empire on your land, with your legacy as the down payment. The coffee cup rattled in my hand. He hadn't just stolen my workshop, he'd used it as the foundation for his own fraudulent kingdom. He had leveraged my life's work against itself, creating millions out of thin air while tossing me the scraps. But how is that legal? I asked, my voice hoarse. It's dancing on the edge of it, Sal said. He'll claim the sale price was fair market value. He'll have a dozen bogus appraisals to back it up. The shell companies obscure the conflict of interest. It's slick, I'll give him that. Disgusting, but slick. He pushed the folder closer to me. But that's not the half of it. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts from social media, magazine articles, and financial statements Sal had managed to pull through back channels. Marcus was everywhere. He'd rebranded himself. He wasn't just a financier anymore, he was a tastemaker, an aficionado of high-end automotive investments. He had started a new venture called Thorn Automotive Collection. He was buying and selling rare classic cars, promising his wealthy clients massive returns. His Instagram was a nauseating gallery of imposing with Lamborghinis and Ferraris, Chloe draped on his arm, both of them wearing expressions of bored, entitled wealth. He was holding court at car shows I used to frequent, surrounded by people who used to be my colleagues, my friends. He had not only taken my past, he was cosplaying my life, wearing it like a costume. Then I saw it. A photo from a feature in Rob Report. The headline read, Marcus Thorn, the Midas of motoring. In the background of one of the photos, parked in the climate-controlled garage of their new Beverly Hills mansion, was a familiar shape under a silk cover. The caption identified it as a soon-to-be-unveiled 1967 Shelby GT 500, a personal project. My Shelby. The one I was building for my daughter. The one she watched her husband steal. He hadn't even bothered to sell it. He was keeping it as a trophy. A symbol of his victory over the old man. That was the moment the smoldering coal in my chest erupted into a white-hot furnace of rage. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the workshop. It was about the desecration. He was a fraud, a parasite feasting on a history he hadn't earned, on a passion he could never understand. He dealt in veneers and polished surfaces that hid rotten cores. I dealt in authenticity. I knew the difference between a numbers-matching engine block and a rest amp, between original factory paint and a cheap respray. I knew a fake when I saw one. And Marcus Thorne was the cheapest fake of them all. I looked up at Sal, my eyes burning. "He thinks he's untouchable," I said, my voice eerily calm. "He thinks he has all the power." "Legally, Artie, he's buttoned up tight," Sal warned. "The DA won't touch a case this convoluted. It's a civil matter at best, and he'd bury you in legal fees until you're dust." I closed the folder. The clatter of the diner faded away. The smell of frying bacon disappeared. All I could see was that photo of Marcus, smug and victorious, with my car, my legacy, as his backdrop. The world had gone quiet, and in that silence, I found a new, terrifying clarity. Marcus had built his empire on lies. He had surrounded himself with the symbols of authenticity, rare cars, a handcrafted legacy, to give himself the legitimacy he craved. And that was his weakness. That was where I would break him. I wasn't going to sue him. I wasn't going to fight him in a courtroom, his chosen battlefield. I was going to drag him into my world. The world of oil, steel, and unimpeachable truth. I was going to expose him for the fraud he was in front of the very people whose admiration he so desperately coveted. "He doesn't have all the power, Sal," I said, meeting my old friend's gaze. "He just stole it from someone who wasn't using it." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my beige apartment, the manila folder open on my lap. The face of my daughter looked up at me from the glossy magazine page, smiling, hollow. I felt a pang of sorrow so sharp it almost took my breath away. She was a victim, too, in her own way. Seduced by the glitter of Marcus's ambition, too weak or too blind to see the rot underneath. But pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. She had made her choice. Now I had to make mine. I went to the small desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a fresh legal pad. For 40 years, my plans had been drawn on blueprints and sketched on greasy napkins. Now, they would be written in neat, precise lines of ink. My revenge wouldn't be a swift, angry outburst. It would be a restoration. A meticulous, patient, and total disassembly of Marcus Thorne's life. I would strip him down to the frame, expose every cracked weld and patch of rust, and leave him bare for the whole world to see. At the top of the page, I wrote a name. Not Marcus. Not Chloe. I wrote, Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. The most prestigious, most revered classic car show in the world. It was held every August on the coast of Monterey. It was the ultimate stage, where billionaires and connoisseurs gathered to worship at the altar of automotive perfection. A place where reputation was everything and authenticity was the only currency that mattered. I'd read in one of the articles that Marcus was planning to make his grand debut there. He had acquired a crown jewel for his collection, a car so rare and valuable it would cement his status as a major player overnight, a 1957 Ferrari 250 Testarossa. A car worth upwards of $40 million. A car that would be scrutinized by the most knowledgeable experts on the planet. And as I looked at that name on the page, a cold, hard smile touched my lips for the first time in months. A fraud, I thought, can only be exposed by a master of the genuine. And my hands, though old, still remembered the feel of the real thing. I had found my battlefield. My war council convened not in a boardroom, but in the dusty backroom of a speedometer repair shop in Bakersfield. My first call had been to Miguel Rodriguez, a man whose hands could diagnose an engine's ailment just by listening to it breathe. He was in his late 70s, with a face like a dried riverbed and eyes that saw the world in terms of compression ratios and timing chains. He owed me a favor from 20 years back when I'd sourced a set of impossible-to-find pistons for his own passion project. "Artie," he'd said on the phone, his voice thick with a Calo accent. "I heard what that Pendejo did to you. You tell me who to hurt." "I don't need you to hurt anyone, Miguel," I'd replied. "I need your eyes. And your memory. Now, sitting across from him, I laid out the articles about Marcus. Miguel squinted at the glossy photos of the Thorne Automotive Collection. "He's a peacock, this one," Miguel grunted, tapping a greasy finger on a picture of Marcus beside a Jaguar E-Type. "All feathers. But what's under them?" "That's what we need to find out," I said. "He's buying up cars too fast. He's making a name for himself too quickly. In our world, that doesn't happen without cutting corners. I need to know what corners he's cutting." My second call was to a woman named Evelyn Reed in San Diego. Evelyn was an artist whose medium was automotive paint. She could spot a respray from 20 paces and could tell you the chemical composition of a paint job from the 1950s just by the way it caught the light. She was a legend in the restoration community and fiercely protective of its integrity. She listened to my story on the phone, the silence on her end punctuated only by the slow, deliberate draw of a cigarette. "The man's a parasite, Arthur," she'd said, her voice like gravel and smoke. "He's what happens when money thinks it can buy passion." I'm in. The three of us, a council of forgotten craftsmen, became the nerve center of the operation. Sal was our eyes and ears on the financial end, tracing auction records and bills of sale. He discovered that Marcus was buying cars that had questionable histories. Cars that had been in fires, floods, or serious wrecks. Cars that legitimate collectors wouldn't touch, but that could be bought cheap. Miguel, through his vast and formal network of mechanics and parts suppliers, an old-school internet of greasy phone calls and whispered conversations at swap meets, started putting out feelers. He asked about the cars Marcus had bought. Who did the engine work? Where did he source his parts? The whispers started coming back. A shop in Van Nuys known for its ability to restamp engine blocks, making a new, replica block appear to be the original, numbers-matching unit. A chrome plater in Anaheim who was rumored to use cheaper, quicker methods that looked good for a few years before pitting and flaking. An upholstery guy who was an expert at faking the distressed look of vintage leather. A pattern emerged. Marcus wasn't a restorer, he was a cosmetologist. He was buying wrecks with legitimate vehicle identification numbers, vents, and titles, and then building new cars around them with replica parts. He was selling high-quality fakes, propped up by the legal identity of the original, long-dead car. It was brilliant, in its own evil way. Legally, he could claim the car was the 1955 Porsche Speedster because the VIN plate on the chassis said so. But in reality, 90% of the car was brand new steel from Taiwan and a replica engine from a company in Arizona. To the untrained eye of a wealthy investor looking for a trophy, it was perfect. To an expert, it was heresy. And his masterpiece, the Ferrari Testarossa he was taking to Pebble Beach, was bound to be the grandest fraud of all. A real 57 Testarossa is a unicorn, Artie, Miguel said, shaking his head in reverence. They only made 34. Each one is known, its history documented from the day it left Maranello. You can't just find one. So he's built one, I said. He must have found a wreck, or maybe just a VIN plate and a title from a car that was destroyed decades ago. And he's commissioned a full replica to be built around it. It's sacrilege, Evelyn whispered, her face grim. To pass off a replica as the real thing at Pebble, it's spitting on the altar. The plan solidified. We weren't going to make a public accusation. That would be messy, a case of my word against his. Instead, we would compile a dossier. A meticulously researched, undeniable mountain of evidence. We would document every lie, every shortcut, every fraudulent part. We wouldn't give it to the police. We would give it to the judges at Pebble Beach. We would give it to the handful of hyper-respected journalists who covered the classic car world. And we would give it to the blue-blooded collectors whose respect Marcus craved more than money. We would let the community, our community, be his judge and executioner. The next few months were the most intense of my life. I felt a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer a victim moldering in a beige apartment. I was a hunter on the trail. My days were spent on the road in my old Ford pickup, meeting with Miguel's contacts, taking sworn affidavits, photographing suspect parts, and collecting samples. I went to a dusty warehouse in the Mojave where a man who specialized in vintage wiring harnesses showed me the difference between period-correct cloth insulation and the modern plastic replicas Marcus's people were using. Evelyn, using high-resolution photos from auction sites, began a microscopic analysis of the paint on the cars Marcus had already sold. She created a detailed report, pointing out inconsistencies in paint depth and chemical makeup that proved they weren't original. She called it the archaeology of a lie. Sal, meanwhile, performed his own magic. He managed to get his hands on the shipping manifest for a container that had arrived at the port of Long Beach, addressed to one of Marcus's shell companies. Inside were a custom-built aluminum body shaped like a Testarossa from a specialty shop in Argentina and a brand-new V12 engine from a company in Italy that made flawless, but modern, replicas of classic Ferrari power plants. It was the smoking gun. We had the blueprint of his fraud. The final piece of the puzzle was Chloe. It was the part of the plan I dreaded the most. I had to know if she was a willing accomplice or just a fool. I had to give her one last chance to step away from the wreckage. I found out from Sal that she volunteered once a week at a high-end animal shelter in Brentwood. I waited for her in the parking lot one afternoon. When she came out, walking a ridiculously small dog, she froze when she saw me. She looked different. Thinner. The carefree shine in her eyes was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive hardness. "Dad? What are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Chloe." We sat in my truck, the silence thick with unspoken accusations. The fancy dog sat in her lap, oblivious. I didn't yell. I didn't blame her. I simply laid a thin folder on the dashboard. It contained a handful of the most damning pieces of evidence: the shipping manifest for the Ferrari body, a sworn statement from a mechanic about the restamped engines, a financial chart Sal had made showing how Marcus had stolen the workshop. I just said, "I want you to read this. I want you to understand what kind of man you married." She opened it, her hands trembling slightly. I watched her face as she read. I saw confusion, then denial, then a flicker of dawning horror. Her entire reality, the foundation of her lavish life, was cracking right before her eyes. This is insane," she stammered, shaking her head. "Marcus is a brilliant businessman. He's making things beautiful again. He's saving these cars. He's a con man, Chloe," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "He's selling fakes to rich people who don't know any better. He's building a reputation on lies. And he started it all by lying to you, and lying to me." "No," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You're just bitter because you couldn't let go of that dusty old garage." The words were meant to hurt, but they sounded hollow, rehearsed. She was trying to convince herself as much as me. I took a deep breath. "Pebble Beach is in 2 weeks. He's going to show that Ferrari. When he does, everything is going to come out. I'm giving you a choice, Chloe. You can be standing next to him when his world burns down, or you can get out of the fire." That's all I came to say. I got out of the truck and walked away without looking back. As I drove off, I saw her in my rearview mirror, still sitting there, the folder in her lap, a solitary figure in a storm of her own making. The choice was hers now. The dossier was complete. A 150-page masterpiece of evidence, bound in simple black covers. It detailed the fraud of the Testarossa and cast a damning shadow over every car in the Thorne Automotive collection. We made 5 copies. One for the chief judge at the concours. One for the publisher of Sports Car Market, the Bible of the collector world. One for a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter at the Los Angeles Times, Sal knew. One for the single biggest classic Ferrari collector in North America, a man whose opinion could make or break reputations. And one for me. The packages were sent via courier, timed to arrive 2 days before the show. An anonymous note was included, reading simply, "For the integrity of the hobby. Ask about the body from Argentina. Ask about the engine from Moderna. Look closely at chassis 0714TR. The trap was set. The bait was on the field. All we had to do now was wait for the peacock to strut into the snare. The air at Pebble Beach on the day of the concours d'elegance is unlike anywhere else on Earth. It's thick with the smell of money, salt spray from the Pacific, and the faint, sweet scent of high-octane fuel. It's a silent pageant, a living museum of automotive history spread across the impossibly green 18th fairway of the golf course. I'd been there many times over the years, as a spectator, always dreaming of one day showing a car of my own. Today, I was there for a different reason. I was there to watch an execution. I wore a simple sports coat and a pair of worn slacks, blending into the crowd of millionaires and celebrities. I was invisible, a ghost from a world Marcus thought he had buried. I saw him from a distance. He was holding court by his prized possession, the Ferrari 250 Testarossa. It was stunning, a symphony of blood-red curves. To the casual observer, it was perfect. Marcus was in his element, dressed in a ridiculously expensive linen suit, a champagne flute in his hand, schmoozing with potential clients and journalists. He was glowing with triumph, a king surveying his domain. And standing beside him, looking like a porcelain doll about to shatter, was Chloe. She had made her choice. My heart ached for her, but my resolve didn't waver. She was a grown woman, and she had chosen to stand by a liar. Throughout the morning, I watched as the judges, clipboard-wielding men in pristine blue blazers, made their rounds. They were the high priests of this religion, and their judgment was absolute. When they reached Marcus's Ferrari, I saw a subtle shift. The usual polite admiration was replaced by a more focused, intense scrutiny. I saw one of the judges, a venerable old Italian man named Enzo Scaglietti, no relation to the famous coach builder, but a legend in his own right for his encyclopedic knowledge of Ferraris, run a hand under the fender well, his brow furrowed. I saw another pull out a small magnet and place it on various parts of the body, a test for aluminum versus steel or, in this case, Bondo filler. They spent more time with that car than any other. Marcus's confident smile started to look strained. He tried to engage them in conversation, but they gave him curt, one-word answers, their focus entirely on the machine. Around noon, I saw the reporter from the LA Times, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica Shaw, approach Marcus, her cameraman in tow. At the same time, the publisher of Sports Car Market and the influential collector I had sent the dossiers to, a Texas oil baron named Beaumont Sterling, converged on the car. It was a coordinated, silent attack. Mr. Thorne, Jessica began, her voice professional but laced with steel, Jessica Shaw, LA Times. We've received some information suggesting that this car, chassis 0714TR, may have some historical inconsistencies. Specifically, that the original car was reported destroyed in a fire at Sebring in 1958. Can you comment on how you acquired it? Marcus's face went pale under his expensive tan. That's an absurd accusation, he blustered, forcing a laugh. This car has been fully authenticated. The provenance is impeccable. Then you won't mind if Mr. Scaglietti and Mr. Sterling here take a closer look? Jessica pressed. Beaumont Sterling, a man who could buy and sell Marcus 10 times over without noticing, stepped forward. He didn't speak to Marcus. He spoke to the judge. Enzo, he said, his Texas drawl cutting through the polite murmur of the crowd. I've seen the real 0714TR. Or what was left of it. Saw it in a barn in Florida 20 years ago. It was a pile of burnt tubing. This ain't it. All eyes turned to Marcus. The crowd around the car was growing, a palpable sense of scandal rippling across the pristine lawn. People smelled blood in the water. Marcus looked at Chloe, a desperate, silent plea for support. But Chloe was staring at the car, her face a mask of dawning, gut-wrenching realization. She was finally seeing it not as a symbol of their success, but as the physical embodiment of a lie. The chief judge, a man who looked like a Supreme Court justice, strode over. Mr. Thorne, he announced, his voice carrying an authority that silenced everyone. We are officially disqualifying this vehicle from judging, pending a full technical inspection. We have reason to believe this is a recreation vehicle being presented as original. This is a serious breach of the rules and spirit of the concours d'elegance. The words hit like a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the crowd. In this world, there was no greater sin. It was like showing up to the Vatican with a forged Rembrandt and trying to pass it off as the real thing. Marcus began to stammer, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. This is a misunderstanding, a professional rivalry. My competitors are trying to slander me, but no one was listening. His wealthy clients were already backing away, their faces a mixture of disgust and embarrassment. The bubble of his reputation had just burst, spraying the filth of his lies all over the most important people in his new world. Jessica Shaw's camera was rolling, capturing every humiliating second. Then, the final, brutal act. Chloe, her face streaked with tears, looked at her husband. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she turned and walked away, pushing through the crowd of onlookers, her shoulders shaking. She didn't look back. Marcus was left alone, standing beside his four-wheeled, $40 million lie. The reporters swarmed him, shouting questions. His face, once so full of smug confidence, had collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He was exposed, stripped bare in the center of his own coronation. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I didn't need to. I turned and walked away, melting back into the anonymous crowd. My work was done. As I headed towards the exit, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. It was from Chloe. Just 3 words. I'm so sorry. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the words on the screen, the Pacific Ocean glittering in the distance. I didn't reply. Some things were too broken to be fixed with words. On the long drive back down to Pasadena, I felt a profound sense of quiet. It wasn't victory. It wasn't joy. It was the calm that comes after a storm. I had taken apart the engine of my enemy, piece by piece, and laid all his rotten components out for the world to see. It was a mess I had no interest in cleaning up. I had simply shown everyone the truth. The rest would take care of itself. The fallout was catastrophic and beautifully swift. The LA Times story ran the next day, a front-page exposé on Marcus's entire fraudulent enterprise. The article went viral. The scandal at Pebble Beach was just the beginning. With his reputation in tatters, his investors panicked. The private equity firm that had funded his condo project called in their loan. The wealthy collectors who had bought his other fake cars sued him for fraud. The IRS, alerted by Sal through an anonymous tip about the shell companies, launched a full-scale investigation into tax evasion and money laundering. Marcus was buried in an avalanche of legal and financial ruin. He lost the Beverly Hills house. He lost the car collection, which was seized as evidence. He lost every penny he had stolen and more. He was a pariah, a joke in the worlds of both real estate and classic cars. He had tried to buy a legacy, and in the end, he had only cemented his own infamy. It took nearly a year, but I got my property back. After Marcus's development company went bankrupt, the land went to auction. I used the money from the original forced sale, the money I had refused to touch, to buy it back for pennies on the dollar. The day I got the keys, I walked back into the empty, cavernous workshop. It was just a concrete shell. The developers had gutted it. But the bones were still good. The light still fell through the high windows in the same way. It still smelled faintly of 40 years of hard work. I stood in the center of the vast, empty space, and for the first time since that horrible day, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't rebuild the shop to what it was. The past was the past. I started something new. A smaller, more focused operation. I decided I would only restore 1 car a year, and I would teach the craft to a new generation, taking on a few young apprentices who were passionate about the art, not the money. Chloe tried to reconnect. She went into therapy. She divorced Marcus, who, last I heard, was facing federal prison time. She wrote me long, tearful letters. She called. I never answered. The love I had for my daughter was for a girl who no longer existed, and the grief for her was a private thing I would carry to my grave. One day, a flatbed truck arrived at my workshop. On it was the 1967 Shelby GT 500, a gift from Chloe, bought back from the liquidation of Marcus's assets. There was a note attached to the steering wheel. "Maybe one day you can forgive me," it read. "Maybe you can finish this for yourself." I had the car pushed into a corner of the workshop and threw a tarp over it. I never touched it again. My revenge was complete. I had made my traders beg for mercy, Marcus for financial salvation, Chloe for forgiveness I couldn't give. I had won. But standing alone in my reclaimed sanctuary, surrounded by the tools of my trade, I understood the chilling cost of my victory. Some engines are so badly damaged, you can never truly rebuild them. You can only salvage the parts that are left and start again. The end.